Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. Over the last few years, there's been a surge in interest in African art. And as a result, we've not only seen African artists appearing in exhibitions and auctions around the world more regularly, we're also seeing prices rise for these artists. And we've also witnessed the further development of contemporary art scenes throughout Africa. One of those areas is Lagos, the largest city in Nigeria. Among many things, it's the host of an up-and-coming art fair, ArtX Lagos. And in this week's episode of the podcast, we chat with Tokini Peterside-Schwebig, founder of ArtX Lagos, which occurred earlier this month. Tokini chats with us about this year's edition of the fair, as well as the broader art scene in Lagos and even Africa. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks so much for listening. Tokini, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So before we even get into the fair, for our listeners who aren't so familiar with the art scene in Lagos, tell us a little bit about it and about the growth you've witnessed there over the last few years related to galleries, artists, and collectors.
Sure. I mean, the Lagos art scene is incredibly exciting in that it's been growing very ambitiously, I'd say, over several years. You know, when we launched ArtTactic Lagos in 2016, it was very much a catalyst in Lagos that helped to really bring the art ecosystem, the art sector back to the fore and back to kind of a place of attention. For those who don't know, and I'm sure some of your listeners don't know, you know, Lagos is the commercial and cultural capital of Nigeria, which is the biggest economy in Africa. And so Lagos is a really kind of bustling city. It has a lot going on business-wise and culturally. But what's happened over the last, I'd say, 6-7 years since we created the fair is you've seen, you know, the arrival of many more galleries. You've seen kind of auction houses really start to engage much more closely with Nigerian collectors. And we've also seen Lagos becoming a hub and a gathering place for the rest of the continent right here in our city. And so our fair really has been very instrumental in making that happen, and also kind of getting the world's attention to Lagos and making it clear that the art system here is vibrant, it's thriving. There are fantastic artists and practitioners to get to know and explore. And so we're thrilled at the trends that we've seen.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. Myself and many others have been following, but from the outside, so it's great to hear your perspective. I'm curious, how much interest have the artists and art community in Lagos received exactly from galleries and collectors outside of Africa?
Quite a lot in recent years. I mean, if we look at even our fair, which is the sort of the beginning of the art season and very much the forefront of the art season in Lagos, each year we have increasing numbers of visitors, collectors, museums, institutions coming into the city, especially at that time of year, which is sort of end of October, beginning of November, to explore what the city has to offer. And then, of course, you have the arrival on the Lagos art scene of international players like, for example, Tiwani Contemporary, who've established a gallery here recently. The artist Yinka Shonibare has also established a residency for artists, which I'm a trustee of. And, you know, these kinds of insertions in the capital of Lagos are bringing in more and more numbers of people. Our fair gets visited by hundreds of collectors from around the world. They come from varied countries. Sometimes it's very difficult to keep track, but we're excited at the inflow of people for sure, whilst of course ensuring that we're strengthening and reinforcing art patronage here.
So the 7th edition of your art fair, ArtX Lagos, concluded earlier this month. Just how different was the fair this year from, say, the inaugural version? Just how much has it evolved over that time span?
Yeah, so the fair has grown significantly. You know, we started as quite a boutique fair in 2016, and you know, we've continued to see our gallery numbers grow, but also our audience numbers grow too. The 7th edition, which held in the first weekend of November, was really well attended. We had upwards of 30 galleries, a mix of Nigerian and also international and Pan-African galleries participating in the fair, showing roughly 120 artists from about 40 countries. So the fair has always been very Pan-African in its focus. Of course, our core collector base begins with Nigeria, but we do attract so many collectors from across Africa and the world. And one of the things that Artex Lagos is very known for is its curated program. Our special projects, our talks program. We also have music performances, live performances at the fair, creating a very vibrant and very rich and engaging atmosphere that draws and pulls in so many different people across varied backgrounds. So there are several significant ways in which Artex Lagos is quite different from the typical fair you'd experience in Europe or Asia, where we focus on the market. Of course, it's important, but we also ensure that the offering of the fair is broader, it's more inclusive, more encompassing, and these are just some of the ways in which we've evolved over the years.
And so tell us, how were the sales at the fair this year? I know Nigeria has experienced some economic softening recently. Did that have an impact? And also, are collectors predominantly interested in African artists, or are you seeing foreign galleries bringing artists from around the world and introducing them to African collectors?
I mean, what we've generally seen is that, this market sort of 7, 8, 9 years ago started very much collecting specifically Nigerian art. And then, of course, as the fair emerged and brought many more Pan-African artists to the attention of collectors, that broadening of appetite for African artists has really grown. So actually, collectors come to our fair to explore art from outside of Nigeria that they don't otherwise get to see. But what we find is that the works that they tend to be most drawn to are works by artists, I guess, with whom they feel some affinity and some element of a shared experience. So these may be artists living across Africa, artists of African heritage living in the diaspora, artists of the Black diaspora, and even sometimes as well, artists who are not African in origin, but whose subject matter connects to the collector's day-to-day experience. In terms of the performance of the fair this year, I would say that our performance this year compared to previous years, was affected, I would say, quite truthfully, by the socio-political environment in Nigeria at the moment. Like many economies around the world, the UK, I mean, so many to name, the Nigerian economy has also, in the aftermath of COVID and a number of things that have happened locally and regionally, has also the Nigerian economy, I was saying, taken a bit of a beating. And so what we found this year was that collectors were a lot more selective in terms of what they were buying, really kind of seeking value in the purchases that they were making. And so, of course, some of our galleries performed quite strongly, whilst others, had, let's say, encounters with collectors that can yield to better engagements in future, but definitely there were some differences.
And so looking ahead, if we think about Lagos and how that art scene there continues to evolve, what do you think are some of the notable challenges and exciting opportunities for the region looking into the future?
So in terms of the opportunities, one thing I feel quite strongly about is the fact that we've still got to really think about evolving and growing the art ecosystem in Nigeria beyond just the market. So there are a number of us who are very proactively thinking about, for example, the network of museums, artist residencies, workshops, project spaces. How can we ensure that the artistic production coming out of our city continues to live up to our arts heritage, and ensuring that, as our artists are going out into the world, they're also being exposed to the best arts education that mean that they will then have long and sustainable careers. So I think there's a lot to be done here in terms of that kind of development. And so, yeah, we're really hopeful and excited to see what the future brings. But I know for many of us who are stakeholders here, it really does feel like it's time to kind of buckle down and dig deep.
Tokini, thanks so much again for coming on the podcast and helping us recap this year's edition of ArtX Lagos, as well as sharing your perspective on the evolving art scene there. If our listeners want to learn more about the fair, where can they go?
So it's artexlagos.com for our website, and our social media handles everywhere are just at ArtexLagos. So you can find us there.
Perfect. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.